Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Masks Off for People Pleasers and Perfectionists. I am Kim Gross, your host, and today my guest is Dr. Charlene Arellano. And I am so excited to have this conversation with you. But before we jump in, I'm going to start with a quote as I normally do. And Dr. Charlene offered this one. I love me some Rumi. So this is such a good quote by Rumi. And it is: the universe is not outside of you. Look inside yourself. Everything that you want, you already are. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so welcome, Dr. Charlena. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world.
Yeah, I love that quote, and every time I hear it, it never changes. I get goosebumps, and
Me too.
goosebumps always tell me that this is the truth, that this is the deep truth, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll tell you a little bit about myself, Kim. I am a psychologist, and I'm also a psycho-spiritual transformational life coach. And it's a mouthful. I know it's a mouthful, and it's actually very intentional, and it really reflects my own journey. It reflects my own journey, not just professionally, but personally. I came into it's interesting how life takes you to places that you're intended to go. As Rumi's quote says, what we are is already inside of us. And so life takes us in the direction that we need to go in terms of expressing ourselves and who we're supposed to be in this world, right? I have a really interesting, and I would say all of us have interesting stories, right? We all have interesting
Yeah.
stories. And my story, in terms of what brought me to self empowerment, and quite frankly, if somebody would have asked me this 20 years ago and said that I would be having this conversation with you today about self empowerment, I would have probably looked at them like they had a third eye or something, because it wasn't something that I imagined. Yeah, I love where my life has taken me. And I love the fact that I'm talking about this. And I believe that I am in a perfect position to talk about this because of my life experiences. I'm very transparent about my journey, and I've shared on my podcast, the Empowered Living Zone podcast. I talk about my entry into this world, and I was born into a family where there was a lot of adversity, and the adults in my life, my caretakers, were very preoccupied with their own things, their own traumas, their own survival stories. And because of that, they really weren't available to parent. And so I found myself as the oldest child taking care of myself and my two younger brothers and really being in charge of the three of us. And my first experience of the universe being inside of me actually happened pretty young. And I will tell you that I had experiences as young as I can remember, probably around 4, where I felt this very deep presence in me. And it was interesting because as a 4-year-old, we don't have a frame of reference. We don't have a lot of life experience. And what was interesting from a 4-year-old perspective, I knew that this experience deep within me was me and wasn't me at the same time. And I know that sounds like a contradiction, but that's the best way to describe it. Now, looking back at it as a wiser person, I recognize that deeper voice was my highest self, which is part of the universe. And so that was my experience in the beginning of my life. And it was really critical, quite frankly. It saved me a lot of times, and it guided me and protected me in lots of ways. And I was able to avoid some really unfortunate kinds of events in my life because of this voice. And that's how it started. And then what's interesting is, and you will often hear this with individuals who are on like a conscious spiritual path, they will often talk about this experience of almost going to sleep. It's like something happens and you disconnect. It's like you lose this connection to this higher being within you, and you're in life and you're trying to figure it out. And that voice may not be as strong. And quite frankly, it went dormant for me until my late 20s, as a matter of fact, when I jokingly describe having an awakening. It was a very dark awakening. But it was an awakening, and it was a moment in my life at 29. I had earned my PhD. I'd purchased my house, my first house. I bought my first favorite car, and was doing everything I wanted to do. And yet I felt really empty inside. There was a panic, a moment of panic. Wait, I'm 29. I've achieved everything I've wanted. And this is not what I thought it was going to feel like. I felt really empty and blah. And I started exploring. Quite frankly, it was like I wanted more meaning in my life. And that's what took me down this path once again to a conscious spiritual exploration. And what was interesting about this is I felt like two experiences emerged with this. One was getting back in touch with that part of my being, that higher self. I call it the calm confidence, the compassionate, witnessing higher self that is looking at me and my life from a higher perspective. And then at the same time, I was also opened this door to another experience, and I did not expect this. And this was the experience of my traumatized self. I had gone through a lot of trauma in my childhood. And for any of the listeners who have any trauma in their childhood, they'll understand this when I say this. You don't have the luxury of feeling or processing experiences. You just get through them and you survive them. And so they get tucked away and they get put away in boxes in your being. And so what happened is when I opened this door to spiritual exploration, it's like I opened up Pandora's box. And it was probably even a little bit more forceful than Pandora's box. You think about this energy that comes out of this box. No, this was much more like I would call it like a backdraft. And again, the analogy of a backdraft, somebody opens up a door, a fire gets oxygen and it explodes. And it's a very powerful force. And that's what it felt like for me in the sense of it pulled me back into my body. And I hadn't been in my body because of the trauma. And so what happened is it really opened the door and paved this pathway for me for probably the next, I would say 20 years of healing. And as I was healing and I was working through my own trauma, what I came to were things like mindfulness, self-awareness. The witnessing mind was critical in my work, in my personal work and my personal healing. And in this work and where I am today, this is what opened the door to what I'm about. I call myself the self-empowerment queen. And I talk about the triad. I talk about the empowerment triad. And what I have in this empowerment triad is essence, which is our higher self. You can call it whatever you want. Higher self, self with a capital S, our true self, our core self. There's all these things that you can call it. You can call it God. You can call it whatever you want. I call it essence. And I believe that's a really important part of our beingness. And in addition to this, and this comes from my work around my trauma, the other pillar of this triad is what I call ego. And ego gets a bad rap, Kim. I will tell you, people really, it's probably an experience or a concept that people really don't understand. And it's funny, you go on the internet, you see these memes, death to the ego, kill the ego. And it's really a misunderstanding. We need our ego. Our ego is who we are as our personality. So you have your higher being, and then you have the part of you that develops experience. This is where the ego is born. And so we need that. We need the collaboration of our essence and our ego. And then finally, the third pillar of this triad is experience, and specifically life experience. It's interesting how often people resist what they're actually experiencing in life. And if only they would lean into it, it's like life and our experiences in life are like our fuel for the vehicle to propel forward. And we take those experiences in and we metabolize them, we process them. And it with that life experience, it puts us in whether it creates thoughts, emotions, sensations. What it does is it's the fuel or it's the thing that compels us toward movement and expression in our world. And so that's hopefully as abbreviated as I possibly can be about how I got to where I am today.
Yes, I love it. I love it. And I have so many things to say. And I love the synchronicity when I just so align with one of my guests and their stories. And although you were 4, I may have been a little bit older, like 8, 6, 7, when I remember being at my aunt and uncle's lake house. And I share this story in my memoir that I'm writing currently, and I remember just being on the lake early in the morning when the lake was just so still and
Mm.
calm that you could see your reflection in it. And I was in my rowboat and rowing and just remember taking one oar at a time and going methodically, watching the oar go in the water. And I was so freaking present in the moment that I knew, like, you said it so beautifully, and I loved it. You said something like, "I knew that it was me, but it was also something else that I was connected to." How did you say that? Because that was beautiful.
Thing that was not me. It was greater
Something
than
that something that was not, I knew it, but of course I was a little girl. I didn't have language for that, but I felt it.
Mhm.
And then as time went on, and I started to experience my own trauma in childhood and was conditioned by my family of origin, the society, and so on and so forth, is when I started to wear my masks and I started to play out patterns instead of actually leaning in to experience, like you said. And I think that often why so many of us don't lean into our experiences is because we perceive it as being so painful. And because the mind is wired to move away from pain and toward pleasure, we do what you just mentioned. Like we stuff it, we bury it, we just survive it, especially when we're in childhood. So I just know that I started to wear the mask, play out the patterns, and started to eventually lose my connection to that present that I felt as a little girl. And as I got older, it was more and more. And then you said you hit that time in your life when you were 29 and you're sitting there and I can picture you. You're in your new home, your new car. I'm a psychologist. I'm rocking it. I'm a badass. Holy shit, I feel empty inside. What's going on? The rug is pulled right out underneath me.
Yes.
And for me, my wake up was I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease and I had a 5 and 2-year-old. And it was like, I have to do something different. And that's when I started to learn about the mind body connection. And then it was a 25-year journey for me as well to do the work and heal to be able to come back to that place of what I felt when I was that 6-year-old little girl on the lake. And that's what the quote is. The universe is not outside of you. Look inside yourself. Everything that you want, you already are. And it was just that I had to remember who I was and
Yes.
connect to that essence. So, do you want to say a little bit more about that and how we can help the listeners to tap into that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I believe, again, all may not believe this. I believe that's the primary purpose as to why we are here as humans is to remember who we are. And as you were talking and you were describing your experience in the rowboat, I was thinking about that. And I was thinking about children know who they are and there's no judgment and they don't make excuses for who they are. And children, especially under 5, are so connected to that greater sense of themselves. And I'm sitting here thinking about that, and it's, gosh, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had language and the consciousness that we have as an adult to be able to experience what an infant experiences or a toddler, because they're closer to their fullest expression than we ever are as we're growing up. And going back to the universe being within us and leaning into our experience, I think this is a particular challenge for many of us in today's world. And it's interesting, and many people, I think, get to a point in their lives, and I am almost 60. I'm just a months away from being 60. And so I grew up at a time, or I've experienced life at a time where there had been drastic changes in our culture. I remember being a little girl and everything was closed on Sunday. There was nothing open on Sunday. And the beauty of that, Kim, is it required, or it called out of you presence. Like, all there was to be with yourself and to be with your family. I miss those times, and I feel very fortunate that I lived at a time to experience that when there was no internet, there was no voicemail, there were no pagers or beepers. There were 3 channels on it. TV was out at 11 o'clock. It's like I lived in those simple times, and I really appreciate the value of that. And in today's world, and it's interesting, I see this everywhere. You go out into public and people have their noses in a phone. They're on computers, they're on devices, they're streaming things on Netflix, and people's focus is so outward. And because of that, they've made a mistake. They have this misunderstanding that the world is outside of them and that the answers are outside of them and that the things that they're trying to find to fulfill them are outside of them. When in reality, that is the farthest thing from the truth. The answers, everything is within us. And people don't know how to do this. As a matter of fact, I'm doing a podcast later today about mindfulness, and like we're hearing that word kicked around all over the place, but I don't know if people really get what that is. And mindfulness at the core is really going within. And people get really freaked out about this. It's interesting when I work with clients and I introduce to mindfulness. Mindfulness is one of the most powerful tools that we can have as a human. And when I introduce these concepts to my clients, they look at me like deer in the headlights and they don't know the first thing to do. And you would think that I was asking them to walk a tightrope or something. And it's interesting to see how much fear there is. I think the fear is, what am I going to discover inside? And I think also the fear is, I don't know how to do this. And in reality, there is nothing to learn how to do. We already know how to do this. This is something that we're born with. It's a natural tool, yet it's like anything else that we practice. If we don't exercise, the muscle atrophies, right? And this is exactly the same idea, is you practice this and it's a muscle that just gets stronger and stronger. And so it's very simple. It's very simple. You could take 5 minutes a day and just go inside, and literally go inside and just notice. What do you notice? Sometimes people are able to start this practice by noticing sensations in their body. Those are easy to key into. You can notice a pain in a joint, or you can notice a warmth radiating from your calf muscle, for example, or you can notice a restlessness in your feet. And that's the first step, is just noticing and observing what's happening in your body. The more you do that, you can step up. You can step up from sensation in your body to, what am I actually feeling? What kind of feeling? When I say feeling, I don't mean sensation, emotion. What am I feeling in terms of emotion right now? Am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling tense? Am I frustrated? Am I agitated? Am I calm? Am I feeling joy? Just to set with that. And again, what's really important about mindfulness is it's observation of internal experience without judgment, without the need to change it, without the
Yeah.
need to control it.
Okay, let's pause there for a moment because what you're saying is so important. So, two things I'm thinking: without the need to judge. So, first of all, that can be extremely hard for so many people, in particular perfectionists. So, if someone's listening to this podcast, most likely they have perfectionistic tendencies. So, what I hear people saying all the time is when they think about mindfulness, they have to meditate. Oh, I don't know how to meditate. I'm terrible at meditating. I'm terrible. Or I'm doing it wrong. Why am I not getting the outcome that I want? So, that is something that could be a challenge for a perfectionist to go inward without judging. So just knowing that it just takes time, baby steps, give yourself grace, compassion. Like I say it over and over. The antidote for perfectionism is grace, space, and compassion over and over. And that can be difficult in the beginning. So
Mhm.
don't beat yourself up if you can't be compassionate with yourself. It takes time And
Mhm.
as you said, to build the muscle, it's building a muscle. So, any thoughts on that, first of all, before I go to my other point?
The building the muscle, and I've heard exactly the same thing, Kim, with my clients. They freak out. Oh, I don't know how to do this. People have a misunderstanding about meditation. So, first and foremost, I want to let you know when I had this dark awakening at 29, that was my beginning of meditation practice. And I've been meditating ever since. So, I've been meditating every single day for 30 years. And I'm going to tell you, when I first started it, I was horrible at it. And why was I horrible at it? Because I couldn't sit still and I couldn't get my mind to settle down. And I actually started my meditation practice through movement.
Mm,
Movement worked for me. People have this idea that meditation is sitting down with your leg crossed and your eyes closed and you holding your fingers like this and you saying om and really it isn't. Meditation is really about being present. And so what I did in the beginning was through movement, walking and really paying attention to my body as I walk, like feeling my feet touch the ground and what that pressure felt like. Noticing the experiences in my body was a form of meditation. Another really easy form of meditation are things like daily activities. I remember I was training myself to meditate with things like washing dishes. Like I would wash dishes and I would slow down that process and I would feel the water on my hand. I would feel the warmth, the temperature of the water. I would feel what water felt like on me. I would do that and that really helped me to open the door to what I call more of the serious meditation, where today I could easily meditate for an hour and a half in the very formal kind of meditation where my eyes are closed and I'm completely within. And that
yeah.
took me 30 years to get to.
Yeah, yeah. So I love that. So that's a great point to offer. The other piece that you said earlier was about just sometimes going inward and just noticing our feelings or our emotions. So again, just because I could hear maybe a listener, I could hear myself 5 years ago, 10 years ago saying, okay, wait a minute, Dr. Charlene, no way. Like I was so conditioned as a child and growing up to stuff my feelings, right? You said like when we're children and going through trauma, we just figure out how to survive it. And for me to survive my big, painful feelings and emotions, I squashed them. So that can feel very scary for someone who's just beginning their journey or beginning the work. They get flooded, they get overwhelmed. And as a therapist, I'm sure you even see this in your practice where a person just all of a sudden they're going inward and they're like, oh boy. And then they want to just shut it down because they become so flooded. So, any thoughts, suggestions, or tips on how to for someone who's listening, like, how to gently work with that, because at the end of the day, it is so imperative
Mhm.
and important to do the inner work and heal. It's the only way that we're gonna have that empowerment, is if you keep that trauma buried. I don't wanna go into all or nothing, but I would say it would be very difficult for you to return to that essence that's inside of you because you're just so blocked, I guess is the word, by your trauma, by your pain, by your pain and trauma, basically. And that's a big crux of my work in my 5-step power pathway is the healing work, embracing the inner child, healing, doing the shadow work, healing all of that. So again, going into being mindful and just going inward when it's so hard and scary for someone, what would you say?
It's a great question, Kim, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It's been my experience with many of my clients is that they're terrified. They're
Mm,
terrified of what they're going to discover inside of themselves. First and foremost, what I say to my clients is, you already did the hard part. The
mm,
hard part was surviving it. So you've already done that. And I think that's really important for them to hear because sometimes we lose that sense of confidence that, oh, wait a minute, I did go through that. I'm stronger because I went through that. So reminding them that they've already been through the hard part. That's one thing, first and foremost. The second thing that I think is really important, and it's very simple, is Just breathe. So what happens is, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds because I'll almost right up front, Kim. I'm a nerd. I'm a neuroscience nerd. I know a lot about the brain. I remember my last year of graduate school and I took neuropsychology. I was like, oh, maybe I won't graduate. Maybe I'll stick around because I was so fascinated with the brain. And what's really cool is all the neurobiology that is coming up around things like compassion, empathy. They're actually finding the neurological, neurobiological foundation and mechanisms for these experiences. They can actually track them in the brain, which is really cool. So, connecting to that, we all have this is a tool. The simple practice of just taking very slow breaths, what that does is it engages the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is our calming system. And so what happens is when people are freaked out about going in, their sympathetic nervous system is activated. It's the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response of, oh my God, I'm not going to survive this. And they go into the survival brain. That's what happens when they're terrified about what's happening inside. And so just the simple practice of breathing very slowly. I often talk about taking a breath from the tip of your toes and having it go through your entire body to the top of your head and holding it for a half second and then going slowly through your body to the tip of your toes. That visual is really helpful because it engages the parasympathetic nervous system, which creates calm. That's the second thing. The third thing that I think is really important is to engage that part of us that is loving, compassionate, kind, and take it with you. Imagine it as a loving grandparent and to take it with you and have that part of you be with you that has compassion, that has empathy, and to have it with you. That is the part that I play often with my clients is that part, the compassionate, kind, loving observer. There are many times I'm in a session with a client who is processing trauma, and just my presence with a calm voice and compassion is enough for them to have the courage to go in.
I love that. So, to just summarize, so we talked about mindfulness being such an important key tool,
Mhm.
focusing on the breath. And then we have that compassionate, loving, kind self. And it reminds me when I say that out loud is how often Tara Brach talks about the two wings. And that's what you just described is the one wing is the mindfulness and then the other piece is the compassion. It's the mind and the heart.
Mhm.
And it's such a beautiful combination. And when one can bring those together, when things come up or you're triggered in the present moment, that's the opportunity. That's the invitation to bring both the mindfulness and the heart presence to the situation in the moment in
Yes.
order to collapse it, to heal it, to dissipate that particular layer of energy until the next one comes. But every time there's a new spiral of healing, in my
Mhm.
experience. And when you're able to do that enough and heal that inner child, heal those childhood wounds, that trauma, that pain, then the opportunity is there to come back to that place of presence that you experienced as a 4-year-old, that I experienced as a 7-year-old on the lake with the rowboat. And the more we're in touch with our essence, the more we can live life from a place of abundance, inner peace, joy,
Mhm.
freedom, because now we're free to be our true freaking selves.
Yes. Yes. And I'd
And
like
that's
to
empowerment.
yeah.
That's
Yes,
empowerment.
and I wanna add an important element to that. You have the heart, you have the mindfulness, and I think what's also really important is that we are embodied.
Yeah.
Embodied.
Yes.
That is really critical. A lot
So,
of us are living from our head up. Our body, our nervous system is actually a really important partner in this process. It's like our personal GPS system.
yes.
And that's really critical as well. So you have your mind, your heart, and your body is also very critical in this empowerment triangle.
the mind, body, spirit
Yep.
connection. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for adding that last piece on because that is critical. So, tell the listeners where they can find you, if they should find you because you're so freaking smart and so wise. Well, I love talking with you and could talk for another hour, but we'll keep it short for the listeners. Where can they find you?
Thank you, Kim. I appreciate the acknowledgement. Thank you. If they're interested in working with me or learning more about me, the best way to reach me is through my website. And my website is www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. Again, www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. Also, I invite your listeners to listen to my podcast. I go into lots of details about the things that we've talked about today, and my podcast is called The Empowered Living Zone, and you can find it on every podcast platform and on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, awesome. Thank you so much for being an amazing guest. I really enjoyed the conversation with you.
I did as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, everybody, there you have it. Dr. Charlena. I encourage you to go and check her out and follow her. If you enjoyed this conversation, give us a thumbs up. If you have questions, if you want to hear more, comment, let us know. And I will see you next time on Masks Off for People Pleasers and Perfectionists. So there you have it. I hope that this episode was insightful. I hope it was valuable and that the tips and tools that Dr. Charlena and I offered will serve you in some way, shape, or form. If you are really struggling though, and you feel as if you just aren't living the life that the way you want, and you feel like you are miserable on the inside, or maybe you're not miserable and life is going just okay, but you want more. And there's something that feels missing. There's a connection that you're looking for either to yourself or to others. And you just can't quite figure out what to do next or how to unhook from that way of being. If that's the case, then I invite you or encourage you to go to my website. You can book a call with me and take a look at my 5-step power pathway that I have on my website. It's kimgrosscoaching.com. Very simple, very easy. And through coaching, I take you through the 5-step power pathway to help you to really do the work and to heal so that you can unhook from patterns that are keeping you from actually living the life that you want and desire. And I do hope that you find these episodes valuable. And if so, I would appreciate that you give a thumbs up or send a review.